What happens when she pulls away expecting you to chase, but instead you disappear completely? That's the moment the entire game changes. In the beginning, when a woman starts creating distance, many men react the same way. They start texting more, they start trying harder, they double their effort because they believe if they show more attention, more care, and more persistence, they can pull her back in. And over time, this reaction becomes so common that many women actually expect it. It becomes a pattern they have seen again and again. When she takes a step back, the man usually steps forward. When she becomes a little cold, he becomes warmer. When she slows down her communication, he speeds his up. The dynamic becomes predictable, and because it is predictable, she feels confident about how the situation will play out. She believes she understands the script. In her mind, if she withdraws a little, you will chase a little harder. If she becomes less available, you will try even more to gain her attention. And when that pattern repeats enough times, she begins to believe that your attention is something she can always rely on, not necessarily because she doesn't value it, but because it has always been there. When something is always present, the mind stops questioning whether it might disappear. Your effort becomes part of the normal routine. Your interest feels constant, your presence feels guaranteed. And that's exactly why many people become comfortable testing the connection. She might pull back slightly just to see how you respond. Maybe she becomes a little slower to reply. Maybe she becomes slightly more distant in conversation. Sometimes it's not even intentional, it can simply be a natural shift in her emotions or her mood. But deep down, she expects a familiar reaction. She expects you to notice the distance and close the gap. She expects more attention, more effort, more energy coming from your side, because that's what most men do when they feel someone slipping away. But this is where something powerful can happen. Instead of reacting with desperation, instead of chasing harder, you choose something different. You don't argue. You don't beg for attention. You don't try to force the connection back into place. You simply step back. You give her the same space she created, and in that moment, something changes. The pattern she expected suddenly disappears. The script she thought would play out no longer works the way she imagined because the man she thought would chase is no longer chasing. And that's where the entire dynamic begins to shift. When you disappear, instead of chasing, the first thing that happens is something she never expected. The pattern she believed in suddenly breaks, and when a pattern breaks, the mind immediately starts paying attention. For a long time, the interaction between the two of you may have followed a very predictable rhythm. When she pulled back a little, you moved closer. When she became distant, you tried harder. When her energy dropped, you increased yours. That kind of pattern happens so often in modern dating that many people begin assuming it will always happen that way. So when she stepped back and created distance, she already had a picture in her mind of what would happen next. She expected the messages to increase. She expected you to check in more often. She expected you to try to win her back, to prove your interest, to show that losing her attention affected you. But instead, nothing happened. No emotional reaction, no desperate texts, no attempt to force the connection back into place, just silence. And that silence does something powerful because it disrupts the expectations she had already created in her mind. Suddenly, the script she believed would play out has been rewritten. At first, the silence might seem small. Maybe a day passes without hearing from you. She may assume you're busy or distracted. Maybe she believes you'll reach out later when things calm down, but when the silence continues, something begins to feel different. The man who once seemed predictable is no longer predictable, and human psychology reacts strongly to unpredictability. When people cannot easily understand someone's behavior, their attention naturally moves toward figuring it out. She begins noticing the absence. The messages that used to appear regularly are gone. The familiar energy that once came from you is missing. And the more noticeable that absence becomes, the more it interrupts the emotional rhythm she had grown used to. This is when your silence starts doing its work because instead of you reacting emotionally, she is now the one reacting internally. Instead of you thinking constantly about her, she begins wondering about you. Why didn't he chase? Did something change? Is he upset? Did he lose interest? Did he move on faster than I expected? These questions start forming because your reaction didn't match the expectation she created. And when expectations break, attention rises. She may start watching your actions more closely. She may check your activity online. She may replay recent interactions in her mind, trying to find the moment. where things shifted. What once felt certain now feels uncertain. And uncertainty creates curiosity. The silence you created isn't empty, it's full of unanswered questions in her mind, questions that only appeared because you refused to follow the predictable path that most men take. Because when you stop reacting the way someone expects, you become impossible to ignore, and that's when curiosity quietly begins to take control of her thoughts. After the silence breaks her expectations, something even more powerful begins to happen inside her mind. The confidence she once had about the situation slowly starts fading, and curiosity begins taking its place. At first, she may have felt completely sure about how things would unfold. She believed that if she pulled away, you would come running back with more attention, more effort, and more emotional investment. That belief gave her a sense of control over the dynamic between the two of you. But now that the expected reaction never arrived, that certainty begins to weaken. The human mind naturally tries to understand things it cannot predict. When someone behaves in a way that breaks the usual pattern, it creates a sense of mystery. And mystery has a strange effect on people. It pulls their attention closer instead of pushing it away. Now she begins thinking about you more than before. Instead of you wondering what she's doing, she starts wondering what you're doing. Instead of you checking your phone, hoping to hear from her, she may find herself looking at her phone, noticing the absence of your messages. That small shift in focus begins changing the emotional dynamic. Curiosity grows quietly. She may begin checking your social media more often than usual. She might look at your recent activity, wondering what's happening in your life. Is he busy? Is he seeing someone else? Did he lose interest completely? Questions like these start forming because your behavior no longer matches the version of you she had created in her mind. Before, you were easy to read, your attention was obvious, your interest was visible, your actions followed a pattern she could understand, but now you've become harder to figure out. And when someone becomes harder to understand, they naturally become more interesting. This is the stage where curiosity begins replacing confidence. The certainty she once had about controlling the situation slowly fades away. The man she thought would always chase her attention now feels unpredictable. That unpredictability creates intrigue. She may start replaying your last conversations in her mind, searching for clues about what might have changed. She may wonder if she pushed too far. She may question whether she misjudged how you truly felt. The silence you created becomes louder than any message you could have sent because instead of you explaining yourself or reacting emotionally, your absence leaves space for her imagination to work, and imagination can be incredibly powerful. When someone starts imagining possibilities, they often become more invested in the situation than they were before. The man who once seemed easy to predict has now become a mystery she wants to solve, and curiosity has a way of pulling someone closer even when you've stepped further away. As curiosity continues to grow in her mind, something deeper begins to happen. The questions she once asked about your silence slowly turn inward, and this is the stage where she begins questioning her own decision. At first, when she pulled away, she likely felt confident about it. In her mind, creating distance probably felt like a small move that would cause you to react. She expected you to chase, to show more effort, to prove that her presence in your life was still something you were fighting to keep. But when that reaction never came, the emotional balance of the situation started shifting. The curiosity she felt earlier now starts turning into reflection. Instead of only wondering what you're doing, she begins thinking about what she did. She starts replaying the interactions that happened before the distance appeared. She may remember moments where you were consistent with your attention, times when you showed interest without hesitation, conversations where you made an effort to connect, to listen, to bring energy into the interaction. And now that your presence is gone, those moments begin standing out more clearly. It's strange how the mind works. When something is always there, it often fades into the background of everyday life. But the moment it disappears, the mind begins highlighting it. Your attention, which once felt normal, now feels missing. And when something meaningful goes missing, people naturally start wondering whether they misjudge its value. She may begin asking herself questions she never asked before. Did I push him too far? Did I assume he would always be there? Did I mistake his patience for weakness? These thoughts begin appearing because the outcome she expected never arrived. She expected you to chase. She expected you to fight harder for her attention. She expected the emotional pressure to stay on your side of the connection. But now the situation looks different. Instead of chasing, you step back. Instead of reacting emotionally, you remain silent. And that silence has forced her to face the possibility that your presence was never something she could control. This is where the emotional shift becomes stronger. The man she once believed would always be available now seems distant and independent. The connection she once felt comfortable testing now looks more fragile than she expected. When people realize that someone they underestimated is no longer chasing their approval, it creates a powerful moment of clarity because now she begins recognizing that the dynamics she believed she controlled may not have been under her control at all. And when that realization settles in, doubt begins replacing the confidence she once had. She starts wondering whether pushing you away was actually the moment she lost something valuable. As that doubt begins to grow in her mind, something else starts developing quietly beneath the surface. The curiosity, the reflection, and the questions she has been asking herself slowly lead to another realization: your independence. When you disappeared, instead of chasing, you didn't just break her expectations. You showed her something she may not have expected to see from you: strength. Not the loud kind of strength that argues or demands attention, but the quiet kind that simply walks away when something no longer feels balanced. The kind of strength that doesn't beg to be chosen. At first, she may not immediately recognize this shift. She might still believe that you will eventually return and continue the pattern that existed before. But as more time passes and your silence continues, the message becomes clearer. Your life did not stop. You didn't spend your time trying to convince her to stay. You didn't chase her approval. You didn't flood her phone with emotional messages asking for another chance. Instead, you focused on your own path, and that changes the way she sees you. Because when a man continues living his life without chasing someone who walked away, it communicates something powerful. It shows that his happiness is not completely dependent on another person's validation. That kind of energy is rare. Many people struggle with letting go, and when someone pulls away, they panic. They overthink. They chase harder because they fear losing the connection. But when you choose a different response, when you simply step back and keep moving forward, it creates a completely different impression. Now she begins seeing you from a new perspective. The man she thought would fight for her attention now appears calm and focused on his own life. The person she expected to react emotionally is showing emotional control. And emotional control often translates into confidence. Confidence is naturally attractive, not because it tries to impress anyone, but because it shows that someone respects themselves enough to walk away from situations that no longer feel mutual. As she observes this shift, your independence starts becoming noticeable. She may start realizing that your attention was never guaranteed. It was something you gave freely when the connection felt right. And once she understands that, the value of your attention begins rising in her mind. Because the man who refuses to chase someone who is pulling away is often the same man who knows exactly what he deserves, and realizing that can completely change the way she sees you. And eventually, everything leads to the final stage, the moment when the entire dynamic between the two of you quietly flips. When she first created distance, she believed she understood the situation. She believed she could predict how you would react. In her mind, the power and the connection felt like it was leaning in her direction. After all, she assumed you would chase, and when someone expects to be chased, they often feel in control of the outcome. But your disappearance slowly changed that balance through the silence, through your absence, and through your refusal to play the role she expected. The emotional pressure began shifting from your side to hers. Instead of you trying to regain her attention, she found herself thinking more about yours. This is where the power dynamic begins to transform. The man she once believed would always be available now feels distant. The attention that once felt guaranteed now feels uncertain. And when something that used to feel easy to access suddenly becomes unavailable, its value naturally rises. Human nature responds strongly to scarcity. When something is always present, people assume it will always remain there, but the moment it disappears, the mind begins treating it differently. The attention she once received without effort now feels like something she may have lost. And that realization changes the way she sees the entire connection. Now she may begin noticing things she overlooked before. The consistency you once showed, the calm energy you brought into conversations, the effort you made to keep the connection alive when things were still mutual, These qualities begin standing out because they are no longer part of her daily experience. The man she thought she understood has now revealed something unexpected about himself: self respect. By walking away instead of chasing, you demonstrated that your attention was never something cheap or desperate. It was something you offered willingly when the connection felt balanced. But the moment that balance disappeared, you chose not to fight for something that required you to lose your own dignity. And that quiet decision says more than any argument ever could. Because when someone realizes that your attention is not easily controlled, they begin seeing you differently. The person who once seemed predictable now appears strong, composed, and difficult to replace. And that is when the entire perspective shifts. The woman who once thought you would chase her now understands something she didn't see before: that the man who can walk away with confidence is often the one whose attention becomes the most valuable of all.